The thunder cracked overhead as Delilah Cooper clutched her soaked shawl tighter around her shoulders, desperately searching the darkness for any sign of shelter along the muddy road leading into Pueblo, Colorado. The year was 1878, and she had never felt more alone in her life, standing in the pouring rain with nothing but a carpet bag containing her meager possessions, and the remains of a train ticket that had brought her west with promises of a new start. Delilah had been traveling for days, her funds dwindling with each passing mile. The stagecoach that was supposed to take her the final leg of her journey had left without her when she'd stepped away to purchase a modest meal. Now, as thunder rumbled through the mountains and lightning illuminated the stormy sky, she trudged forward, each step more difficult than the last as her boots sank into the mud. Her substantial frame, which had always been a source of cruel remarks back in Philadelphia, now felt heavier than ever as she fought against the wind and rain. She had come west to escape the whispers, the stares, and the rejection, hoping to find work as a schoolteacher in Pueblo where no one knew her name or her past. Through the sheets of rain, Delilah spotted a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through her as she quickened her pace, ignoring the ache in her legs and the way her wet dress clung uncomfortably to her body. As she drew closer, she could make out the outline of a modest homestead, a small cabin with a barn nearby, smoke curling from the chimney despite the downpour. Summoning her courage, she approached the cabin door and knocked, praying someone kind would answer. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited, seconds stretching into what felt like hours before the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. A cowboy, judging by his attire and the worn leather chaps still clinging to his legs. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice deep and tinged with concern as he took in her bedraggled appearance. "I apologize for the intrusion, sir," Delilah said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "My name is Delilah Cooper. I was headed to Pueblo when I got separated from the stagecoach. I was hoping perhaps I might find shelter from the storm here for the night. I can pay." She reached for her purse, though they both knew whatever coins she had would hardly compensate for the imposition. The cowboy studied her for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in, Miss Cooper. You'll catch your death out there." Gratefully, Delilah stepped into the warmth of the cabin, feeling immediate relief as the heat from the fireplace enveloped her. The cabin was simple but clean, with a table, a few chairs, a small kitchen area, and a bed in the corner. "Name's Clint Summers," the cowboy said as he closed the door behind them. "Ranch isn't much, but it's dry." "Thank you, Mr. Summers. I cannot express my gratitude enough." Delilah stood awkwardly, water pooling at her feet, her carpet bag clutched in her hands. She was acutely aware of how she must look soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, her generous figure more pronounced in her wet clothing. Clint moved efficiently around the cabin, stoking the fire and pulling a blanket from a trunk. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you fall ill." Delilah accepted the blanket with trembling hands. "I don't wish to be a burden. Perhaps I could sleep in the barn. I noticed you have one, and I wouldn't want to impose further." Clint's expression hardened slightly. "The barn? In this weather, with the roof leaking and the wind howling through every crack? No, madam. You'll sleep in my bed, and I'll sleep here by the fire." "But no arguments," Clint said firmly. "I won't have it said that Clint Summers left a lady to sleep in a barn during a storm. There's a screen in the corner you can change behind, and I'll rustle up something for us to eat." Delilah wanted to protest further, but the kindness in his eyes stopped her. No man had ever shown her such consideration before, especially not a handsome one like Clint Summers. Back east, Men had either ignored her entirely or made her the target of their cruel jokes, never seeing past her size to the person she was inside. "Thank you," she said quietly, moving behind the privacy screen with her carpetbag. As she changed into her nightgown and wrapped the blanket around herself, she could hear Clint moving around the cabin, the clinking of dishes, the soft crackle of the fire. When she emerged, he had set 2 bowls of stew on the table and was pouring coffee into tin cups. "It's not fancy," he said, gesturing to the simple meal, "but it's hot." "It looks wonderful," Delilah replied, taking a seat at the table. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm raging outside. Delilah found herself studying Clint when he wasn't looking. He had kind eyes, a warm brown that reminded her of the chestnuts she used to collect as a child. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw covered by a few days' growth of beard. His hands were calloused, speaking of hard work and resilience. "So what brings you to Pueblo, Miss Cooper?" Clint asked, breaking the silence. Delilah hesitated, setting down her spoon. "I'm to be the new school teacher," she said. "At least I hope to be. I have an appointment with the town council tomorrow." "A school teacher? We could use one." "Last teacher left months ago to get married. Kids have been running wild ever since." "You have children, Mr. Summers?" Delilah asked, immediately regretting the personal nature of the question. Clint shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. "No, madam, never been blessed that way. My wife died of fever 5 years ago before we could start a family." "I'm sorry for your loss," Delilah said softly. "Life goes on," Clint replied with a small shrug, though the pain was evident in his eyes. "What about you? Leaving anyone behind back east?" Delilah laughed lightly, though there was no humor in it. "No, no one. I've never been. Well, men don't typically look twice at women of my size, Mr. Summers." Clint's gaze met hers directly. "Then the men back east must be blind as well as foolish." Delilah felt her cheeks flush with heat, unaccustomed to compliments. To hide her embarrassment, she picked up her coffee cup and took a long sip. "I'll ride into town with you tomorrow," Clint offered. "Make sure you get there safe. Storm should pass by morning." "You don't need to trouble yourself," Delilah protested. "It's no trouble. Need to pick up supplies anyway." Clint stood and cleared their dishes, moving with an efficiency that spoke of years of living alone. When it was time to retire for the night, Delilah again tried to insist that she would be fine on the floor by the fire, but Clint was adamant. "You take the bed," he said firmly. "I've slept in worse places than my own floor." He arranged a bedroll near the fireplace, maintaining a respectful distance. Delilah reluctantly climbed into his bed, enveloped by the scent of pine and leather that seemed to cling to everything Clint owned. Despite her exhaustion, she found herself lying awake, listening to the storm and the occasional shifting of Clint on his bedroll. "Mr. Summers," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, Miss Cooper. Thank you for your kindness tonight. I won't forget it." There was a pause before his reply came, soft and sincere. "Get some rest, Miss Cooper. Morning comes early in these parts." Delilah closed her eyes, feeling safer than she had in a long time. As sleep finally claimed her, she couldn't help but wonder about the lonely cowboy who had opened his home to a stranger in a storm. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong, the storm having washed the world clean. Delilah woke to the aroma of coffee and bacon, finding Clint already up and preparing breakfast. He had a quiet efficiency about him, moving around the small cabin with practiced ease. "Sleep well?" he asked, glancing up as she folded the blanket neatly at the foot of the bed. "Better than I have in weeks," Delilah admitted. "And yourself?" "Just fine," Clint replied, though the slight stiffness in his movements suggested otherwise. After a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and fresh biscuits, Delilah was impressed by Clint's cooking skills. They prepared to ride into town. Clint saddled 2 horses, a strong chestnut gelding for himself and a gentle mare for Delilah. "I haven't ridden in years," she admitted nervously, eyeing the horse. "Daisy here is gentle as they come," Clint assured her, helping her mount. His hands were strong and sure as he assisted her, never once making her feel self-conscious about her weight. The ride into Pueblo took just over an hour, giving Delilah a chance to appreciate the beauty of the landscape. Rolling hills dotted with scrub brush stretched toward distant mountains, the morning sun casting everything in a golden hue. Clint pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the area and its history. Pueblo itself was larger than Delilah had expected, with several streets of buildings, a church spire rising above the rest, and the constant bustle of activity. Wagons rolled down the main street, cowboys lounged outside the saloon despite the early hour, and women in calico dresses moved between the general store and the millinery. Clint guided her to a modest building with a sign reading Town Hall and helped her dismount. "The council meets here," he explained. "Mayor Thornton's usually in by now." Inside, they found not only the mayor but the entire town council, apparently in the middle of a heated discussion. The conversation halted abruptly as they entered, 5 pairs of eyes turning to assess the newcomers. "Summers," a portly man with a bushy mustache acknowledged. "Don't often see you in town this early." "Mayor Thornton," Clint nodded. "This here is Miss Delilah Cooper. She's come about the teaching position." Mayor Thornton's expression shifted to one of interest, though Delilah didn't miss the quick up-and-down glance that assessed her figure. "Miss Cooper, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. The train arrived early, but I had some difficulties with the stagecoach," Delilah explained, standing straighter despite her nerves. "Mr. Summers was kind enough to offer me shelter during the storm and escort me to town this morning." One of the other council members, a thin man with spectacles, leaned forward. "You have your credentials with you, I trust." Delilah opened her carpetbag and produced a letter from her previous employer and her teaching certificate. The council members passed them around, murmuring amongst themselves. "Well, everything seems to be in order," Mayor Thornton said finally. "And to be frank, Miss Cooper, we're somewhat desperate. The children have been without proper schooling for months now." "I understand," Delilah said. "I'm prepared to begin immediately." "Excellent," the mayor replied. "The schoolhouse is at the end of Pine Street. Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house has a room prepared for you. The position pays $30 a month, with room and board covered by the town." "Thank you, Mayor Thornton, gentlemen," Delilah said, relief washing over her. She had secured the position with surprising ease, though she suspected their desperation had more to do with it than her qualifications. As they left Town Hall, Clint offered a small smile. "Seems like you're officially Pueblo's new school teacher, Miss Cooper." "It seems I am," Delilah agreed, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "I can't thank you enough for your help, Mr. Summers." "Let me show you to the schoolhouse before I run my errands," Clint suggested. "It's on my way." They walked down the main street, leading their horses, and Delilah couldn't help but notice the curious glances they received. A woman of her size was unusual enough to draw attention, but walking alongside one of the local men seemed to spark particular interest. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a larger desk at the front, and a blackboard mounted on the wall. It was dusty from disuse but otherwise in good condition. "It's perfect," Delilah said, running her hand along one of the desks. "School term starts Monday," Clint informed her. "You'll have about 20 students, ages 6 to 16. Delilah turned to him, curious. You seem to know a lot about the school for a man without children. Clint's expression softened. My wife was the school teacher here before she fell ill. I helped her prepare for classes sometimes. Oh, Delilah said, understanding dawning. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's all right, Clint assured her. Been 5 years now, and the school needs someone like you. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with an unexpected connection. Delilah broke it first, clearing her throat. I should probably get settled at the boarding house. Clint nodded. I'll walk you there. Mrs. Holloway can be particular about first impressions. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a wrap-around porch, neat curtains in every window, and flower boxes bursting with color. Mrs. Holloway herself was a severe-looking woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, but her eyes were kind as she welcomed Delilah. You must be exhausted from your journey, dear, she said, showing Delilah to a modest but comfortable room on the 2nd floor. Dinner's at 6 sharp. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, though you can entertain in the parlor until 8. Delilah blushed at the implication. I don't anticipate having any gentlemen callers, Mrs. Holloway. The older woman's eyes twinkled knowingly. No. I saw you arrive with Clint Summers. He's quite the catch, you know. Hardworking, owns his own ranch, and hasn't so much as looked at a woman since his wife passed. Mr. Summers was merely being kind, Delilah insisted, her cheeks growing warmer. I was caught in the storm last night and he offered shelter. Mrs. Holloway hummed, clearly unconvinced. Well, I'll leave you to freshen up. Your trunk arrived yesterday. The stagecoach driver brought it by when you weren't on board. Said you'd paid for delivery to Pueblo. Relief flooded Delilah at the news. Her trunk contained most of her clothes and books, things she would need for teaching. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. Once alone, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 24 hours. She had arrived in Pueblo, secured her position, and found lodging, all with unexpected ease. And she had met Clint Summers, a man who had shown her more kindness and respect in one night than most men had in her entire life, but she knew better than to read too much into his actions. Clint was clearly just a decent man who would have helped anyone in her situation. To imagine that he might see her as anything more than a woman in need of assistance was foolish. With a sigh, Delilah began unpacking her trunk, preparing for her new life in Pueblo, Colorado. Clint Summers completed his errands quickly, purchasing supplies at the general store and stopping by the blacksmith to arrange for some repair work on his plow. All the while, his thoughts kept returning to Delilah Cooper. There was something about her that had captured his attention from the moment she appeared on his doorstep, soaked and vulnerable, yet dignified despite her circumstances. It wasn't just her pretty face with those expressive green eyes, or the way her auburn hair had curled as it dried by his fire. It was her spirit, her determination, and the intelligence that shone in her gaze. As he loaded his purchases into his saddlebags, Sheriff Tom Bennett approached, a knowing grin on his weathered face. "Heard you brought the new schoolteacher to town," the sheriff remarked. "Quite a change from your usual solitude, Summers." Clint secured the last of his supplies. "She got caught in the storm. What was I supposed to do, leave her out in it?" "Course not," Tom agreed. "But word is you're looking at her like a man who's been in the desert looking at water." "That's nonsense," Clint said firmly, though he could feel heat rising to his face. "Miss Cooper is a respectable woman who's come to teach our children. Nothing more to it than that." Tom held up his hands in surrender. "If you say so. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you started taking an interest in someone again. Sarah's been gone 5 years now." Clint's jaw tightened at the mention of his late wife. "Some things you don't get over, Tom. And some things you learn to live with," the sheriff countered gently. Sarah wouldn't have wanted you to spend the rest of your days alone on that ranch, and you know it." Before Clint could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A group of cowboys, clearly having started their drinking early, were harassing someone outside the general store. To Clint's dismay, he realized the target of their crude comments was Delilah. Without hesitation, Clint strode toward the scene, the sheriff following close behind. As they approached, he could hear the taunts clearly. "Might be the biggest schoolmarm I ever did see," one of the cowboys was saying, eliciting laughter from his companions. "Bet she breaks the students' desks if she sits on him," another added. Delilah stood frozen, clutching a package to her chest, her face flushed with humiliation but her chin held high, refusing to show how deeply their words cut. "That's enough," Clint said, his voice low and dangerous as he positioned himself between Delilah and the cowboys. The men, 3 of them wearing dusty trail clothes and sporting the brand of the Circle D Ranch on their bandanas, exchanged glances before the apparent leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, stepped forward. "Well, if it ain't Clint Summers," the man drawled. "Since when did you appoint yourself protector of?" I said. "That's enough," Clint interrupted, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "Miss Cooper is Pueblo's new schoolteacher, and you'll show her the respect she deserves." Sheriff Bennett moved to stand beside Clint. "You boys might want to reconsider your current course of action. Public drunkenness and disturbing the peace could earn you a night in my jail." The cowboys assessed the situation, clearly determining whether the confrontation was worth continuing. Finally, the leader spat on the ground and gestured to his companions. "Come on, boys, ain't worth the trouble." As they turned to leave, he couldn't resist one parting shot. "Didn't know you had a taste for big women, Summers." Clint took a step forward, but Delilah's hand on his arm stopped him. "Please don't," she said softly. "It's not worth it." The touch of her hand seemed to calm him instantly. He watched the cowboys swagger away before turning to her. "Are you all right, Miss Cooper?" "I'm fine," Delilah assured him, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I've heard worse, believe me." The sheriff tipped his hat to Delilah. "Madam, I'm Sheriff Tom Bennett. Welcome to Pueblo. Don't let those boys color your impression of our town. Most folks here are decent." "Thank you, Sheriff," Delilah replied with a small smile. "I'm not easily discouraged." "I can see that," Tom said approvingly before excusing himself to return to his duties. Alone with Delilah, Clint found himself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "I'm sorry about that," he finally said. "The Circle D hands can be troublemakers, especially after payday." "It's nothing I'm not used to," Delilah said with a shrug that didn't quite disguise her hurt. "I've been judged by my appearance my entire life." "It ain't right," Clint said firmly. "You're—" He trailed off, uncertain how to express what he was thinking without causing offense. "I'm what, Mr. Summers?" Delilah prompted, a challenge in her eyes. "You're beautiful," Clint blurted out, immediately feeling his ears burn with embarrassment. "I mean, you're a fine-looking woman is all. Those fools don't know what they're talking about." Delilah stared at him, clearly taken aback by his words. "Thank you," she finally said. "That's very kind of you to say." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Clint gestured to the package in her arms. "Getting settled in all right?" "Need help with anything else before I head back to the ranch?" "I believe I'm all set," Delilah said. "Just picking up some supplies for the schoolhouse. Classes start Monday and I want to be prepared." Clint nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Well, if you need anything, my ranch is just over an hour's ride northwest of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction." "I appreciate that, Mr. Summers," Delilah said. "And thank you again for everything you've done." "Clint," he said abruptly. "Call me Clint." A smile spread across her face, lighting up her features. "Then you must call me Delilah." "Delilah," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. "I'll see you around town then." As he rode back to his ranch, Clint couldn't shake the image of Delilah's smile from his mind, nor the feeling that something significant had changed in his life. For the first time in 5 years, he found himself looking forward to his next trip into town. Over the next week, Delilah threw herself into preparing for the school term. She cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized books and supplies, and prepared lesson plans for students of various ages and abilities. The work was demanding but fulfilling, giving her purpose and direction in her new home. Word of the new schoolteacher spread quickly through Pueblo, and Delilah found herself the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations wherever she went. Some were kind, offering welcome and assistance. Others were less so, clearly judging her by her appearance rather than her capabilities. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a staunch supporter, defending Delilah vigorously when she overheard negative comments at the general store. "That young woman has more education in her little finger than most of you have in your entire bodies," the boarding house proprietor had declared loudly. "She'll be the best thing to happen to this town's children in years." Despite such support, Delilah couldn't help feeling isolated and anxious as Monday approached. Would the children respect her? Would the parents? Or would her size be all anyone saw as it had been back east? On Sunday afternoon, as Delilah sat on the boarding house porch reviewing her lessons one final time, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Looking up, she was surprised to see Clint Summers riding toward the house, leading a second horse loaded with what appeared to be lumber. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, though she tried to tell herself it was simply the surprise of his unexpected appearance. He hadn't returned to town since their encounter outside the general store, and though she'd thought of him often, she'd assumed their paths wouldn't cross again anytime soon. "Afternoon, Delilah," Clint called as he dismounted, tipping his hat. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, with the sun at his back and a genuine smile lighting his face. "Clint," she replied, setting aside her papers. "This is unexpected." "Thought you might need some help at the schoolhouse," he explained, gesturing to the lumber. "Sheriff mentioned some of the desks were broken and the steps needed fixing. Figured I could lend a hand before the children arrive tomorrow." Delilah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you, but surely you have your own work to attend to." "Ranch can spare me for an afternoon," Clint said with a shrug. "Besides, I remember how excited Sarah used to get before a new school term. Thought you might appreciate some support." The mention of his late wife surprised Delilah. From what little she knew, Clint rarely spoke of Sarah. That he would invoke her memory now seemed significant somehow. "I would appreciate the help," Delilah admitted, "and perhaps the company even more." Clint's smile widened at that, causing a pleasant warmth to spread through Delilah's chest. Together, they walked to the schoolhouse, Clint leading the horses and Delilah carrying her teaching materials. For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Clint repaired broken desks, fixed the sagging steps, and even built a new bookshelf while Delilah arranged her classroom and wrote the next day's lessons on the blackboard. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and finding common ground in their love of literature and their views on education. "Sarah always said a child who can read can go anywhere in the world, even if they never leave their hometown," Clint remarked as he sanded the edge of the new bookshelf. "Your wife sounds like she was a wonderful teacher," Delilah said softly. "She was," Clint agreed, his expression thoughtful rather than pained. "She'd have liked you, same spirit." The compliment warmed Delilah more than it should have. Tell me about her, she encouraged gently. Clint was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the wood. Sarah was like sunshine, he finally said. Always seeing the best in people, always finding joy in small things. We met when I was breaking horses for her father's ranch. She was the one who convinced me I could have my own place someday. She sounds remarkable, Delilah said. She was. When she got sick, it happened so fast. Fever took her in less than a week. Clint resumed his work, his movements more deliberate now. Afterward, I threw myself into building the ranch she'd always believed we could have, kept me going when nothing else did. Delilah understood loss, though of a different kind. She'd lost her parents within a year of each other, leaving her alone in the world except for a distant cousin who had made it clear Delilah was a burden rather than family. Grief changes us, she said. Sometimes it reveals strengths we never knew we had. Clint looked up at that, meeting her eyes. You understand, he said, not a question but a recognition. I do, Delilah confirmed. They worked in companionable silence after that, the air between them charged with a new understanding. By late afternoon, the schoolhouse was transformed clean, organized, and ready for students. It looks wonderful, Delilah said, surveying their work with satisfaction. I can't thank you enough, Clint. Happy to help, he replied, wiping sawdust from his hands. You'll do just fine tomorrow, Delilah. These kids are lucky to have you. As they stepped outside, closing the schoolhouse behind them, Clint hesitated. Would you like to have dinner with me, at the hotel restaurant, perhaps? To celebrate your first day of teaching or, well, the eve of it, I suppose. The invitation caught Delilah off guard. She'd never been asked to dine with a man before, at least not one who wasn't a relative. I would like that very much, she said before she could overthink it. Clint's relieved smile told her he'd been nervous about the asking. Good. That's good. I'll just get cleaned up a bit and meet you there in an hour. I'll be there, Delilah promised. As she hurried back to the boarding house to change, Delilah tried to temper her excitement. This wasn't a courting situation. Clint was simply being kind to a newcomer. The fact that her heart raced at the thought of dining with him was irrelevant. Men like Clint Summers didn't court women like her. That was a fact of life she'd accepted long ago. Yet as she pinned her hair into a neat arrangement and donned her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the green of her eyes, she couldn't help but hope, just a little, that perhaps things could be different here in Pueblo. The hotel restaurant was the nicest establishment in town, with white tablecloths, proper silverware, and a small vase of wildflowers on each table. Clint was waiting when Delilah arrived, standing as soon as he spotted her. He'd cleaned up impressively, wearing a pressed shirt, vest, and what appeared to be a new bandana at his throat. His hair was still damp from washing, and he'd trimmed his beard. You look beautiful, he said as she approached, pulling out her chair. Delilah felt herself blush. Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself. Dinner proved to be the most enjoyable evening Delilah had experienced in years. Clint was attentive and genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences. They discussed books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see, and their shared belief in the importance of education. Not once did he make her feel self-conscious about her size, even when the waiter had to bring a different chair to accommodate her comfortably. Have you always wanted to be a teacher? Clint asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. Since I was a girl, Delilah confirmed. My mother taught me to read before I was 5, and I was forever playing school with my dolls. What about you? Did you always know you wanted to ranch? Clint shook his head. No, I thought I'd follow my father into carpentry, but I discovered I had a way with horses, and the open spaces called to me. Something about the freedom of it, I suppose. Freedom is precious, Delilah agreed, thinking of her own journey west in search of it. As the evening drew to a close, Clint walked Delilah back to the boarding house, their pace slow as if neither wanted the night to end. "I had a wonderful time," Delilah said as they reached the porch steps. "So did I," Clint replied, his eyes warm in the lamplight. "Maybe we could do it again sometime. Perhaps after your first week of teaching." Joy bubbled up in Delilah's chest. "I'd like that very much." Clint seemed about to say something more, but instead reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was old-fashioned but utterly charming. "Good luck tomorrow, Delilah. Those kids don't know how fortunate they are." With that, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving Delilah standing on the porch, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips. Inside, Mrs. Holloway was waiting in the parlor, a knowing smile on her face. "Had a nice evening, did you?" "Very nice," Delilah admitted, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "I thought it might be," the older woman said with satisfaction. "Clint Summers is a good man, the best kind." "We're just friends," Delilah felt compelled to clarify, Mrs. Holloway's smile only grew. "Of course you are, dear. For now." The first day of school dawned bright and clear, with a crispness in the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Delilah arrived at the schoolhouse early, her stomach fluttering with nerves as she arranged her desk and wrote a welcome message on the blackboard. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving, some excited, others reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Parents came too, sizing Delilah up with varying degrees of openness. She greeted each family warmly, determined to make a good impression. "Miss Cooper, this is my son James," a woman in a faded calico dress said. "He's 8 and smart as a whip, though he'd rather be fishing than studying." "It's a pleasure to meet you, James," Delilah said, bending slightly to shake the boy's hand. "I hope we can find ways to make learning as exciting as fishing." James looked skeptical but managed a polite nod. One by one, the students took their seats, 22 in all, ranging from 6-year-old twins with matching braids to a lanky 16-year-old boy who slouched in his seat at the back, clearly considering himself too grown for school. Teaching had always come naturally to Delilah, and despite her nerves, she soon found her rhythm. She assessed the children's abilities, grouped them accordingly, and set appropriate tasks for each level. By lunchtime, even the reluctant 16-year-old Michael was grudgingly participating in a discussion about the Civil War. When the school day ended, Delilah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. There had been challenges, a few discipline issues to address, wide disparities in the children's education levels, but overall, it had been a successful start. As the last child departed, Delilah sat at her desk to plan the next day's lessons. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the visitor in the doorway until a small cough alerted her to his presence. Looking up, she was surprised to see Clint standing there, hat in hand, a small bunch of wildflowers in his grasp. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Not at all," Delilah replied, setting down her pen. "What brings you to town again so soon?" Clint stepped into the schoolhouse, looking somewhat sheepish. "Thought I'd see how your first day went, and well, bring you these." He offered the wildflowers, a colorful assortment of prairie blooms. "It's tradition, or at least it was for Sarah. First-day flowers." Delilah accepted the bouquet, touched by the gesture. "They're beautiful, thank you. No one's ever given me flowers before." "That's a shame," Clint said with a frown. "A woman like you should get flowers regular." The sincerity in his voice made Delilah's heart skip. "The day went well," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "The children are bright and mostly eager to learn." "Mostly?" Clint asked with a knowing smile. "Well, Michael Stevens might need some convincing that history has relevance to his life, and the Henderson twins seemed to communicate in their own secret language, but we'll get there. Clint laughed, a rich sound that filled the schoolhouse. Sounds like you've got them figured out already. They talked for nearly an hour, Delilah sharing stories from her first day and Clint listening with genuine interest. When he finally left, promising to check in again soon, Delilah found herself looking forward to his next visit with an eagerness that should have alarmed her. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Clint would ride into town 2 or 3 times a week, often with some small excuse delivering fresh eggs from his chickens, bringing a book he thought she might enjoy, or offering to fix something around the schoolhouse. They would talk, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed Delilah through the general store, and she caught knowing looks exchanged between Mrs. Holloway and the other ladies at church. Even the children picked up on it, giggling when Clint appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Is Mr. Summers your beau, Miss Cooper?" 10-year-old Emily Parker asked bluntly one afternoon, as Delilah was helping her with her sums. "Mr. Summers is a friend," Delilah replied evenly, though she could feel heat rising to her cheeks. "My ma says he's sweet on you," Emily persisted. "She says it's nice to see him interested in living again instead of just existing." The comment stayed with Delilah long after the school day ended. Was Clint truly sweet on her? Or was he simply being kind to a newcomer who happened to share his late wife's profession? She didn't dare hope for more, yet she couldn't deny the way her heart lifted whenever he appeared. On a crisp Saturday in late September, Clint arrived at the boarding house with an unexpected invitation. "I thought you might like to see my ranch," he said, standing on the porch with his hat in his hands. "It's a fine day for a ride, and I've packed a picnic lunch if you're interested." Delilah hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I'd love to see your ranch. Give me a few minutes to change into something more suitable for riding." Half an hour later, they were riding side by side out of town, Delilah on the same gentle mare she'd ridden on her first day in Pueblo. The day was indeed beautiful, with a clear blue sky and just enough breeze to keep the air fresh. "How did you come to own your ranch?" Delilah asked as they rode. "Worked for other ranchers for years, saving every penny," Clint explained. "When Sarah and I married, her father gave us a small parcel of land as a wedding gift. After she died, I put everything I had into expanding it, buying adjacent properties when I could. It's not the biggest spread around, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands. Delilah admired that about him: his self-reliance, his quiet determination. The ranch itself, when they arrived, was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy cabin, larger than Delilah had expected, stood near a barn and several outbuildings. A corral held half a dozen horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. A small garden beside the cabin was still producing late-season vegetables. "It's lovely," Delilah said sincerely as Clint helped her dismount. "It's home," Clint replied simply. "Let me show you around." The tour revealed a place that was both functional and comfortable. The cabin's interior was surprisingly welcoming, with handcrafted furniture, colorful quilts, and bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. A woman's touch was still evident in certain details: embroidered curtains, painted china displayed on a shelf, a rocking chair by the fireplace with a faded cushion. "Sarah made that," Clint said, noticing Delilah's gaze on the cushion. "She loved to sew in the evenings while I read aloud." There was fondness in his voice rather than pain, and Delilah realized that he was sharing his memories freely now, without the shadow that had once accompanied them. After the tour, they enjoyed their picnic lunch under a large cottonwood tree near a small creek that ran through the property. The food was simple but delicious cold fried chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a jug of sweet tea. "Did you make all this yourself?" Delilah asked, impressed. Clint nodded. "Had to learn to cook after Sarah died. Man can't live on beans and coffee forever, much as some cowboys might try." "You're full of surprises, Clint Summers," Delilah said with a smile. "Rancher, carpenter, and cook." "Jack of all trades, master of none," Clint replied with a self-deprecating shrug. "Out here, you learn to do a bit of everything or you don't survive." "I think that's admirable," Delilah said earnestly. "Being self-sufficient, creating a life on your own terms." Clint studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Is that what you're doing in Pueblo, creating a life on your own terms?" Delilah considered the question. "I suppose I am. Back east, I was always poor Delilah Cooper, too big, too plain, too bookish. My cousin made it clear after my parents died that I was a burden, though she was Christian enough to take me in." The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. "Here, I can be judged on my merits as a teacher, not just on my appearance." "For what it's worth," Clint said quietly, "I think you're the most interesting woman I've ever met. And beautiful, too, though you don't seem to believe it when I say so." Delilah's breath caught at his words. "Clint, I'm not good with fancy words," he continued, setting aside his plate and shifting closer to her on the blanket. "But these past weeks, getting to know you, they've been the best I've had in years. You've woken something in me that I thought died with Sarah." Delilah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I've enjoyed our time together, too," she managed to say. "The thing is," Clint said, reaching for her hand, "I find myself thinking about you all the time. When I'm mending fences or breaking horses or just sitting by the fire at night. I think about your smile, the way your eyes light up when you talk about your students, how you laugh at my terrible jokes." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "I know it might be too soon. I know you came here to build a life for yourself, not to get tangled up with a rancher who's been half living for 5 years, but I had to tell you how I feel." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. "No one's ever spoken to me like this before," she whispered. "Then every man you've ever known was a fool," Clint said firmly. Delilah looked down at their joined hands, fear mingling with hope in her chest. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that you'll wake up one day and realize I'm not what you want." "That my size, my Delilah," Clint interrupted gently, lifting her chin with his free hand until her eyes met his. "I see you, all of you, not just your size, though I happen to think your curves are beautiful. I see your kindness, your intelligence, your patience with the children, the way you stand up for yourself despite the whispers. I see a woman I admire tremendously and find myself falling for more each day." A tear slipped down Delilah's cheek. "I'm falling for you too," she confessed. "But I never thought, I never dared hope." Clint leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Delilah responded hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as the sweetness of the moment overwhelmed her fears. When they finally broke apart, Clint's eyes were dark with emotion. "I'd like to court you properly, Delilah Cooper, with your permission." Joy bloomed in Delilah's chest, bright and unexpected. "I'd like that very much, Clint Summers." The autumn days grew shorter as Clint courted Delilah with a thoroughness that surprised and delighted her. There were buggy rides through the countryside, dinners at the hotel restaurant, and quiet evenings on Mrs. Holloway's porch swing. Clint attended church with Delilah on Sundays and often lingered afterward to discuss the sermon over Sunday dinner at the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway, like most of the town, watched their courtship with approval. "Never thought I'd see the day Clint Summers came back to life," she commented to Delilah one evening. "You've worked a miracle, my dear." "I've done nothing special," Delilah protested. "You've been yourself," the older woman replied simply. "Sometimes that's all the miracle needed." October brought cooler temperatures and the Harvest Festival, a community celebration that the entire town attended. Clint arrived at the boarding house in his wagon to escort Delilah to the festival grounds, where tables groaned under the weight of food, musicians tuned their instruments, and children darted about in excitement. "You look beautiful," Clint said as he helped Delilah from the wagon. She had worn her best dress for the occasion, a rich burgundy that complemented her auburn hair. "Thank you," Delilah replied, still not entirely used to his compliments but learning to accept them. "You're quite handsome yourself." They moved through the festival together, stopping to chat with neighbors and sample the various dishes. Delilah's students flocked around her, eager to show their teacher the games they were playing and the prizes they'd won. As dusk approached, the band began to play and couples moved to the dance area. Clint turned to Delilah with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance, Miss Cooper?" Delilah hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer, I'm afraid, and I might." She gestured vaguely at herself, the old insecurities surfacing. "You might what?" Clint asked. "Make me the envy of every man here by agreeing to dance with me." His unwavering confidence in her beauty, his complete disregard for the whispers that sometimes still followed them, never failed to amaze Delilah. With a smile, she placed her hand in his. "In that case, I'd be delighted to dance with you, Mr. Summers." Clint led her to the dance floor where several couples were already twirling to a lively tune. He placed one hand respectfully at her waist, held her hand with the other, and guided her into the dance with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Delilah asked as he spun her smoothly. "Sarah taught me," Clint admitted. "Said a man who could handle a wild Mustang ought to be able to manage a simple waltz." The mention of his late wife no longer brought shadows to his eyes, Delilah noticed. Instead, there was a fondness in his voice, as if Sarah had become a cherished memory rather than a painful wound. They danced until Delilah was breathless, then found a quiet spot near the edge of the festival to rest. The night air was cool, and Clint draped his jacket around her shoulders without being asked. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence. "Winter will be here before we know it." "Yes, the children are already excited about the first snow," Delilah agreed. "The thing is," Clint continued, sounding uncharacteristically nervous, "the ranch gets pretty isolated when the snow is heavy, and I find myself not wanting to be away from you for days or weeks at a time." Delilah's heart quickened. "What are you saying, Clint?" He took her hands in his expression serious in the lantern light. "I'm saying I love you, Delilah Cooper. I think I've loved you since you stood on my doorstep in that storm, soaked through but still dignified. I love your strength and your kindness, your patience with the children and your passion for teaching. I love the way you see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes as Clint continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've lived enough to recognize what's real and what matters. You matter to me, more than I can say." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Delilah Cooper, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Inside the box was a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was elegant and understated, perfect in every way. "It was my mother's," Clint explained. "Sarah's ring is buried with her, as it should be. But Ma always said her ring should go to the woman who brought joy back to our family. That's you, Delilah." Overcome with emotion, Delilah could only nod at first, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, I'll marry you, Clint Summers." Clint's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. From somewhere, nearby came the sound of applause, and they broke apart to find that a small crowd had gathered Mrs. Holloway, Sheriff Bennett, several of Delilah's students and their parents, all smiling and offering congratulations. "About time, Summers," the sheriff called with a grin. "Best news this town's had in years," Mrs. Holloway agreed, wiping a tear from her eye. As they accepted the good wishes of their friends and neighbors, Delilah marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had arrived in Pueblo alone and uncertain, seeking only independence and respect. Instead, she had found a community that valued her, students who adored her, and a man who loved her exactly as she was. They were married 2 weeks later in Pueblo's small church, with the entire town turning out to witness the union. Delilah wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Holloway and several other ladies had worked day and night to create, its design flattering Delilah's generous curves rather than attempting to disguise them. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Clint whispered as they exchanged vows. And looking into his eyes, filled with love and admiration, Delilah finally believed him. The wedding celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the happy couple. As night fell, Clint helped his bride into their wagon for the journey to the ranch, their home now. The cabin had been transformed in preparation for Delilah's arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new quilts adorned the bed, and bookshelves had been rearranged to make room for Delilah's collection. A writing desk stood in the corner, a wedding gift from Clint, where Delilah could prepare her lessons and correspond with friends. "Welcome home, Mrs. Summers," Clint said as he carried her over the threshold, a traditional gesture that he managed with ease despite Delilah's concerns. "It's perfect," Delilah said, taking in the thoughtful touches that made the space feel like theirs rather than a shrine to the past. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Delilah's earlier nervousness about the physical aspects of marriage faded under Clint's gentle, reverent touch. He loved her body with the same wholehearted appreciation he showed for every other part of her, leaving no doubt that he found her beautiful in every way. "I never thought I could be this happy," Delilah whispered as they lay entwined, the embers of the fireplace casting a warm glow across the room. "We're just getting started," Clint promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "The best is yet to come," and he was right. Winter settled over the Colorado prairie, blanketing the ranch in snow. Delilah continued teaching, riding to town with Clint on clear days, and staying home when the weather was too harsh. On those snowbound days, they read together by the fire. Clint worked on furniture projects, and Delilah planned lessons or wrote letters to her few friends back east, sharing her happiness. They established routines and traditions, learning to move together in the dance of married life. Clint taught Delilah about ranch work, and she proved to be a quick study, soon able to help with the animals and even assist with minor veterinary issues, thanks to her studious nature and steady hands. In turn, Delilah brought new life to the cabin, filling it with music from the small piano Clint surprised her with at Christmas, cooking recipes passed down from her mother, and creating a warm, inviting home that welcomed neighbors and students for visits. Spring arrived with new calves, fresh green grass, and news that brought tears of joy to Delilah's eyes. She was expecting a child, a baby, Clint said in wonder when she told him, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Delilah asked, though his glowing face already gave her the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clint assured her, gathering her into his arms. "You've given me everything I could have dreamed of, Delilah. A life filled with love, a true partnership, and now a family." As Delilah's pregnancy progressed, her size proved to be an advantage rather than the liability she had feared. "You're built for childbearing," the midwife declared approvingly during a checkup. "Strong and healthy. That baby has plenty of room to grow." Clint doted on her throughout the pregnancy, taking on extra chores so she could rest, reading to her in the evenings as she knitted tiny garments, and talking to their unborn child with a tenderness that made Delilah fall in love with him all over again. The town rallied around them as well. Mrs. Holloway organized a quilting bee to create a blanket for the baby. The schoolchildren made cards and small gifts for their beloved teacher. Even the cowboys who had once mocked Delilah tipped their hats respectfully when they encountered her in town, chastened by Clint's unwavering devotion and the happiness that radiated from the couple. In early November, just over a year after Delilah had arrived in Pueblo, their son was born after a labor that was difficult but without serious complications. They named him Samuel Thomas Summers Samuel after Clint's father and Thomas after the sheriff who had become a close friend and would serve as the boy's godfather. "He's perfect," Clint whispered, holding his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for everything." Looking at her husband cradling their child, Delilah felt a contentment so deep it seemed to fill every corner of her being. This was what she had found in Pueblo, not just acceptance or respect, but love in its purest form, a love that saw her true self and cherished every part of her. 5 years later, the Summers Ranch had prospered and expanded. Their herd had grown, as had their family. Samuel had been joined by a sister, Elizabeth, and Delilah was expecting their third child. The one-room schoolhouse in town had been replaced by a larger building, and Delilah now served as the head teacher, with an assistant handling the younger children 3 days a week, while Delilah focused on the older students. On a crisp autumn evening, much like the one when Clint had proposed, the family sat on their porch after dinner. Samuel, now a sturdy 4-year-old with his father's eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature, was reading a story to his 2-year-old sister, who listened with rapt attention though the tale bore little resemblance to the actual words on the page. Clint sat beside Delilah, his arm around her shoulders, his free hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. They watched their children with matching expressions of contentment, the quiet moment a perfect distillation of the life they had built together. "You ever think about that night?" Clint asked softly. "The storm that brought you to my door?" "Often," Delilah admitted. "How different our lives might have been if the stagecoach hadn't left without me, or if I'd taken shelter somewhere else." "I'd have found you eventually," Clint said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be," Delilah smiled, leaning into his embrace. Like a stubborn cowboy insisting a strange woman take his bed while he slept on the floor, especially that, Clint agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah silently thanked the storm that had altered the course of her life. She had come west seeking a place to belong, never daring to hope for the abundance she had found: a loving husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, and a community that had become family. The woman who had once offered to sleep in a barn now lived in a home filled with love, her heart as full as the life she and Clint had created together. It was more than a happy ending. It was a happy beginning that renewed itself with each passing day, each challenge overcome, each joy shared. And in the deepening twilight, as Clint's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was always meant to be, not despite who she was, but because of it. "I love you," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you," Clint replied, the promise in his voice as solid as the mountains that surrounded their home. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come."